Hello and welcome to another session of Oracle Groundbreakers Live. I'm your host Javed Mohammed here in the Bay Area, and not to fool you, but we have Michel Schildmeijer. Hello, Michel.
Hello.
Who is an Oracle ACE director, and you may think he is also in San Francisco, but he's not. He's actually based in Amsterdam. But thanks to Zoom and those cool backgrounds, and actually his background is even cooler than mine, we are here talking. So welcome, Michel.
Thank you.
All right. So I understand you have a couple of presentations you're doing on the Yatra tour. The first one is build a more secure container platform with alternative tools. So when I think containers, I'm thinking Docker, Kubernetes. So what? Give us a 2-minute overview of the presentation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it's about actually container native landscapes are getting more and more mature in developing and deploying and releasing applications together with the infrastructure, and that also imposes more than only productivity, but also think about security. And the de facto standard Docker-based containers are less secure than the solution where I'm about to talk about, and that solution is based on Kata containers, and Kata containers are actually a small virtual machine, a virtualized container with its own kernel. So when you look at Docker, it has a shared kernel. It shares the kernel from a Linux system, and when you look at Kata containers, then the kernel is not shared. So it means that you have more security at the core of your system. Actually, if you have a bunch of servers running a Kubernetes platform with all kinds of containers, maybe thousands, maybe hundreds, you don't know, then you need to have it secure in the core, because your host operating system is a large surface for attackers. And if they eventually get in, then it's you're really in trouble. So that's why this presentation. And Oracle supports Kata containers, the new technology. It's an open source initiative with the CRI, so custom resource interface for Kubernetes. So it's good migratable and integratable with Kubernetes, and it's also backwards compatible with Docker. So you don't need to do very much to migrate your Docker-based applications to Kata containers.
Okay. So, well, thank you for sharing. So does that mean like Kata is basically going to be the next generation container standard? Will kind of that coexist with Docker being more in a development test environment and Kata more in production, or how do you see that playing out?
Yeah, you can even mix them in one environment if you like. You can have a runtime, Docker runtime with your containers running this Docker runtime, but you can also have another like Kubernetes node running with Kata containers. So you can mix it, and you can also say, I have a test environment using Docker and production environment using Kata containers. That's easy to do because the interface is pretty much the same, and the major difference is actually the kernel sharing, which is not with Docker, Kata, sorry.
Okay, and how about from an orchestration standpoint, from a Kubernetes point of view, how does that change with Kata?
Well, you need to do some extra work. You have your Kubernetes cluster, maybe multiple, and you need to implement some Kubernetes classes for that. And you also need to have a virtualization layer or an emulation layer, actually, like a hypervisor type of emulation. And that's based on KVM, which Oracle also supports. It's the new hypervisor for virtual machines, but also for containers. KVM is supported. And on top of that, there is an extra layer, an emulation layer, which is QEMU, an open source product as well. Those together, you have your container-based virtual machine, actually. So still lightweighted, but all the benefits of the isolation of a virtual machine, actually.
Okay. So, and thank you for sharing. And you have a second presentation about the Oracle SOA Suite. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. Well, Oracle SOA Suite is a product Oracle already has quite some years. And for customers who are starting to think of doing container-based landscapes, but don't want to go to the cloud immediately, or want to try it out, or have some kind of a migration phase from doing on-premise to the cloud, or they want to deliver faster and with more speed their infrastructure. They're thinking of infrastructure as code. Oracle also has developed technology, or worked with the technology, the open source technology, to containerize an Oracle SOA Suite environment. So you have your entire Oracle WebLogic SOA Suite database and everything in containers, and you can run it on Kubernetes using a technology which is called an operator. And an operator is, in fact, Kubernetes does not know anything about Oracle SOA Suite. Actually, it does know everything about pods and container images and and the orchestration. But inside the technology of Oracle, Kubernetes doesn't know anything about it. So Oracle wrote this kind of operator, which is in fact some kind of a software layer in between Kubernetes and Oracle SOA Suite. So all the benefits of the Oracle SOA Suite and WebLogic, you can export them to Kubernetes and say to Kubernetes, this is WebLogic, expose the admin port to the outside world, or do a start-stop of the domain, and all those kinds of things. And Oracle also invested a lot in monitoring with open source tools. Oracle has its own tools, of course, Oracle Enterprise Manager, and in the cloud you have Oracle Management Cloud. But Oracle also emphasized the use of open source technology to make it more accessible for non-Oracle customers. And these tools are Prometheus and Grafana for doing metrics and real-time monitoring, and also more log analytics with Logstash and Kibana from the Elastic Stack, which is a bit comparable with Oracle Management Cloud Log Analyzer. So that's about my second talk.
Okay, excellent. So this is all part of the Yatra tour, and obviously this year it's a virtual tour. Have you been on the Yatra tour previously?
Yeah, last year in 2019, it was my first time in India, and I landed in Mumbai, and already told in my earlier that it was quite a culture shock for me, because I thought Amsterdam was crowded, but when I entered Mumbai, then it was a totally different world for me. But I really enjoyed it, and the tour was also awesome. It was multiple cities. I only attended two, but only the two already were all that intensive, with a lot of nice audience.
Which was the other city?
The other city was Hyderabad, and we were at Tech Mahindra there, and yeah, it was really nice. Some nice ritual during the conference, and yeah, it was a nice atmosphere there. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Let me ask you one last question, and again, it's more about travel than anything else. So you're based in Amsterdam, and I was asking you off camera a little bit. You've lived there all your life. So if someone's visiting Amsterdam, I'm sure there's many things to see, many foods to try. But if there's like one recommendation you have that if you come to Amsterdam, you must do this, what would that be?
I'm sometimes a tourist in my own city. Yeah, well, the canals are very beautiful, I think. Yeah. It's a tourist attraction, of course, to see.
Yeah. All right. So check out the canals.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Michel, it's been a real pleasure speaking with you, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you very much. My pleasure too, and goodbye.
Okay, thank you.